Who would you say is the GOAT of MMA? Is it Jon Jones, GSP, Daniel Cormier, or maybe even Islam? One of the only things they all have in common is a double champ status. Tonight, we're diving into one of the most ambitious pursuits in all of mixed martial arts, becoming a UFC champion in two different weight classes. Winning one belt puts you among the elite, but even that division, stepping into a new weight class and conquering other group of killers, man, that takes a completely different timing, discipline, courage, and a level of ambition that only a few fighters in history have ever possessed. Now, with Islam becoming the newest two division champion after moving up and capturing welterweight gold at UFC 322 without ever losing his lightweight belt, this is the perfect moment to look back at how rare this journey is. Make sure to stick around because later in the video, we're diving into an even bigger question. Who could the UFC see the sport's first triple champion? Let's get into it. The early dream, when greatness outgrew the rules. The dream of becoming a multi-division champion existed long before the UFC ever really allowed it. In the early 2000s, the roster just wasn't deep enough. Divisions couldn't afford to stall. If a champion moved up or down in the weight class, they automatically vacated their belt. No double champ talk, no holding up two divisions at once. That was the line in the sand. But even inside those limits, you had pioneers. Think of like Randy Couture, proved you could beat giants at heavyweight and technicians at light heavyweight. The amazing BJ Penn showed that with world-class skill, technique could erase size, capturing gold at lightweight and then later a tear at welterweight. GSP dominated the welterweight division for years, left on top, then came back 4 years later, moved up and took the middleweight belt before walking away one last time. Comment below, which one is your favorite pioneer? None of them held two belts at the same time, but they cracked the door open. They proved that greatness didn't have to be confined to just one weight class. The rules just hadn't caught up yet. That finally changed in 2016. Conor McGregor, the first true two-division superstar. Conor McGregor didn't just arrive. He strutted down with his signature McMahon walk. At featherweight, he steamrolled through contenders, then walked into UFC 194 in 2015 and KO'd none other than a long-standing champ Jose Aldo in 13 seconds to become the undisputed featherweight champion. One punch, one clean left hand, and a decade-long reign was over. That featherweight title run is famous for a different reason. McGregor never defended it. He held the belt for 359 days, from UFC 194 until UFC stripped him in late November of 2016, and he chased bigger fights in a second bout. That Conor wasn't just thinking about defending, he wanted history. At UFC 205 in Madison Square Garden in 2016, who moved up to lightweight to fight none other than Eddie Alvarez. And that night, he put on maybe the cleanest striking performance of his career, dropping Alvarez multiple times, finishing him by TKO in the second round to claim lightweight gold. That lightweight reign tells its own story. He held that 155-pound belt for 511 days without a single defense. From UFC 205 until the UFC finally stripped him ahead of Khabib versus Ferguson, then eventually Khabib versus Iqueta in 2018. Comment below if you know why Tony Ferguson lost his title shot. No defense from Conor, two reigns, two pieces of history. In between was the Mayweather of boxing spectacle, massive layoffs, and a legacy that still got debated. But that image that never fades is this: Conor McGregor standing in the center of Madison Square Garden with his belt on each shoulder, the first man to rule two divisions in the same era. It was indeed a red panty night, and that's why Dana White family said, and I quote, "Once a certain level of money is obtained, to be the person that you were coming up, to be that hungry and work that hard and be that dedicated to sport or whatever craft it is you do, money changes everything." Conor McGregor has made that kind of money. It's not a knock, it's just a fact. End quote. Love or hate him, that night changed what fighters believed was possible. Daniel Cormier, the blue-collar double champion. Probably my favorite heavyweight fighter and UFC's personality, Daniel Cormier's double champ journey wasn't built on shock value or trash talk. It was built on hard work, heartbreak, and redemption. At light heavyweight, he stepped into the chaos Jon Jones left behind. With Jones being stripped and the title vacant, Cormier fought Anthony Rumble Johnson at UFC 187 in 2015. He survived that legendary power, dragged Johnson to the mat, and finished him with a rear naked choke to become the light heavyweight champion of the world. From there, DC quietly stacked one of the best 205 resumes ever. He defended the belt not once, not twice, but 3 times. First in a brutal split decision war with Alexander Gustafsson at UFC 192, then finishing Johnson again in their rematch at UFC 210, and finally stopping Volkan at UFC 220. That light heavyweight reign lasted 1,315 days, a lot more than Conor's 500 days with no defenses. From UFC 187 in 2015 till December 2018, when Cormier voluntarily vacated the belt the day before UFC 232 so he wouldn't be stripped. He chose to walk away on his own terms and focus completely on heavyweight. Then came the move that cemented his legacy. In 2018, Cormier went back to the heavyweight to challenge Stipe Miocic at UFC 226, the most successful heavyweight champion in UFC history, one of the most feared. Most people thought DC was too small. Instead, he knocked out Miocic in the first round and became the heavyweight champion. That heavyweight reign lasted 406 days. In that run, he defended the belt once, submitting Derek Lewis at UFC 230, before losing it back to Miocic by TKO in their rematch at UFC 241. 2 divisions, 4 total defenses across them, and one of the most respected careers the sport has ever seen. There's no gimmicks, just a lifetime wrestler who climbed 2 mountains the hard way. Are you Team DC or Team Jones? We'll talk a bit more about the rivalry below. Amanda Nunes, the lioness who ruled 2 kingdoms. If anyone ever truly ruled 2 divisions at once, was none other than the lioness Amanda Nunes. Her story as a double champ really starts at UFC 200 in 2016, when she dismantled Miocic Tate and choked her out in the first round to win a bantamweight title. From there, Nunes went on one of the nastiest title runs we've ever seen. In that first bantamweight reign, she defended the belt 5 times. Now, who did she destroy? Do you remember who the top dog was in the women's division back then? Yeah, that's right. She destroyed none other than Ronda Rousey at UFC 207. Then, who's a former champion now, she edged out Valentina Shevchenko in a tense rematch at UFC 215. Battered Pennington at UFC 224. Head kicked Holly Holm at 239. And that's not it, guys. She outclassed Renami at UFC 245. That first bantamweight reign lasted 1,981 days. Think of how long that is. From UFC 200 in 2016, where was the world in 2016? She was stunned and submitted by Juliana Penne at UFC 269 in 2021. She was one of the biggest upsets in UFC history. I made an entire video on the top UFC underdogs and where you can see a breakdown of that massive upset. Check the video at the end of this one. But Nunes wasn't done. After 5 years of being a champ, in parallel with all that, she chased down a second crown. At UFC 232 in 2018, she moved up to featherweight to fight the baddest woman in the world, Cris Cyborg, the woman everyone called undefeatable. In 51 seconds, Nunes dropped her, swarmed her, knocked her out cold to become the featherweight champion. That win made her the first woman in UFC history to hold 2 divisions and 2 different belts. Her featherweight reign lasted 1,634 days. She defended the belt twice, first dominating Spencer at UFC 250 and then submitting Megan Anderson at UFC 259. After losing the bantamweight belt to Penne, she came back for revenge. At UFC 277 in 2022, she completely rebuilt her vein, switched stances, and dominated Penne over 5 rounds to reclaim that bantamweight title and become a 2-division champ once again. That second bantamweight reign lasted 325 days, with 1 defense, a shutout victory over Adeline at UFC 289 before she laid both belts down and retired in 2023. 2 divisions, 8 total UFC defenses across 2 different divisions, and run that for most ends the GOAT debate on the women's side before it even starts. Who do you think is the women's GOAT? Is it Ronda Rousey or the Lioness Amanda Nunes? Henry Cejudo, the Olympian who rewrote his history. Cejudo might have the strangest, most complete combat resume on this list. The Olympic gold medalist at 21. Then years later, he walks into a rematch with Demetrius Johnson at UFC 227 2018, the most dominant champion the UFC has ever seen, and was a razor-close split decision to become flyweight champion. A flyweight reign lasted 574 days. He defeated the title once. He did it against another champion, bantamweight king TJ Dillashaw, stopping him in just 32 seconds at their ESPN card in early 2019. After that, Cejudo vacated the lightweight belt on February 29, 2020. As the division future got messy, his focus shifted up a weight class. Then came bantamweight. At UFC 238 in 2019, Henry Cejudo moved up to fight Marlon Moraes for the vacant bantamweight title. He weathered a brutal early storm, turned the fight around, and finished Moraes by TKO in the third round to become A2 division champion. If you ask him, it's a triple C. That bantamweight reigned 351 days. He defended the belt once at UFC 249 in 2020, stopping none other than Dominic Cruz right before the end of round 2, then immediately announcing his retirement in the cage. Days later, the UFC officially vacated the belt. 2 belts, 2 divisions, 2 defenses, 1 in each. And the smallest man on this list walked away as Triple C with an Olympic gold medal on top of all of it. But Henry Cejudo's story didn't end when he laid his bantamweight belt down in 2020. 3 years later, he returned older, heavier, but still razor sharp, stepping straight back into title fight against Aljamain Sterling at UFC 288. It was a high-level chess match, but after 5 rounds, Sterling edged out a split decision, handling Cejudo the first championship loss of his UFC career. After that, Henry tried to rebuild. He faced rising contender Merab, one of the most relentless wrestlers in MMA, and dropped a unanimous decision. Between those 2 defenses, it became clear that versions of Henry, who once dominated 2 weight classes, was now fighting a younger, faster, deeper generation of talent. And that's what makes his legacy so fascinating. He never lost a flyweight belt. He vacated it. He never lost a bantamweight belt. While he was champion, he retired. When he came back to reclaim the throne, the mountain he once clipped and so easily had grown absolutely steeper. His second chapter didn't add new champions, but it added something else, to understand that even for a double champion, the game never stops evolving. Ilia Topuria, the new heir to division king. Ilia Topuria didn't quietly climb the ranks. He blasted his way into championship territory with the kind of aura that announces a new generation is here. His rise began in UFC 298 in 2024 when he stepped in against one of the greatest welterweights of all time, Alexander Volkanovski. Alexander had cleaned out the division for years, but Topuria didn't flinch. In the second round, he landed a devastating combination and knocked out Alexander out cold, crowning himself the new featherweight champion and ending an era in one breathtaking moment. He validated that champion just months later at UFC 308, where he defended his featherweight belt against none other than crowd favorite Max Holloway, the BMF. Holloway had never been knocked down in his entire career, but Topuria changed that with a brutal third-round finish that stunned the MMA world. It wasn't just a title defense, it was a message that he wasn't temporary holding the throne. He was the throne. Shortly after, Topuria made a move that few champions are bold enough to make. He vacated the featherweight belt, not because someone took it from him, but because he believed his destiny was in a heavier division. He moved up to lightweight, the confidence of a man who had already conquered one of the mountains and was ready for the next. At UFC 317 in 2025, he faced former lightweight king Charles Oliveira for the vacant title. Oliveira has submitted and knocked out some of the best fighters in the world, but Topuria dismantled him in the very first round. At just 2 minutes and 27 seconds into the fight, he landed a clean knockout to claim the lightweight title. In less than a year, he had become a champion in 2 weight classes, one of the fastest ascendants to dual division greatness in UFC history. Topuria's story is still being written, but the foundation is already unmistakable. He won the featherweight belt by knocking out a dominant champion, defended by knocking out a living legend, vacated it without a loss, and then captured lightweight belt with another first-round knockout. He carried an undefeated record into both title reigns, giving him the aura of something rare, 2 division champion who may not have reached his ceiling yet. And now, with the lightweight crown around his waist, the question echoes through both divisions. Who will dethrone the king? Jon Jones, the most complicated double champ in UFC history. Jon Bones Jones' story is one of the most brilliant and chaotic journeys the UFC has ever seen. He became a champion before he was even old enough to rent a car. At just 23 years old, he walked into UFC 128 and fought none other than Mauricio Shogun Rua, a pride legend and the reigning light heavyweight champion. He made the moment look effortless. Jones picked him apart, pressured him, hurt him with everything, and finally stopped him in the third round to become the youngest champion in UFC history. From that night forward, the 205-pound division belonged to him. Across the first reign, Jones didn't just beat contenders. He beat names etched in MMA history. Let's talk about a few of them. Choked out Lyoto Machida standing. Broke down Rampage Jackson. Shut down Rashad Evans in one of the most emotional rivalries the division has ever seen. Outclassed the legend Glover Teixeira and Vitor Belfort. For years, I felt like every legend who stepped up to him walked away defeated. He made the greatness look routine. But the story of Jon Jones has always been bigger than fights. The same years that defined his dominance also became clouded by the kind of headlines no fighter wants. The hit-and-run incident that injured a pregnant woman. The failed drug test before UFC 200. The PED controversy after he knocked out DC at UFC 214. A win that was eventually overturned to a no contest. Suspensions, multiple legal troubles, stripped of multiple title reigns. Every time Jones reached the top, something outside the cage pulled him back down. And yet, every time he came back, he kept winning to this day. He reigned the light heavyweight belt at UFC 232 by stopping Alexander Gustafsson. He defended it against Anthony Smith, survived a razor-close war with Thiago Santos, then beat Dominic Reyes in a fight many thought he lost, but still walked away with the belt intact. By the time he vacated the title in 2020, the move to heavyweight, Jones had never been beaten for that belt in the octagon. 3 years later, he returned to UFC 285 for one of the biggest heavyweight title fights in modern UFC history. Ciryl Gane was a younger, faster, and had been more active than Jones while he was away, but none of it mattered. Jones closed the distance, dragged him down, and submitted him in just over 2 minutes to become the UFC heavyweight champion. A decade after conquering light heavyweight, he became a champion in a second division without ever losing the first. But just like before, the momentum didn't last. Jones was booked to fight Stipe Miocic later that year, but a torn patellar tendon forced him out and created a vacuum in the heavyweight division. Tom Aspinall stepped in on short notice, knocked out Serigi, and became interim champion. And that's where the tensions really started to spark. Fans wanted to unify the fight. Aspinall wanted it too. The UFC wanted it. And the rumor was offered him $30 million to fight Tom. But Jones didn't seem interested. Negotiations stalled, the two traded interviews and subtle jabs, and for the first time in his career, people began to wonder if Jon Jones hadn't found an opponent. He just didn't want to fight. From that moment, he began to the day he officially announced his retirement in 2025. Jones spent roughly 2.5 years, over 839 days on the sidelines, with only frustration, contract disputes, and headlines suggesting he was clashing with the UFC over money. Then came the announcement. Jon Jones was retiring. The UFC vacated heavyweight belt, promoted Tom Aspinall to undisputed champion. But nothing with Jon Jones ever ends cleanly. Just weeks later, he quietly re-entered the USADA testing pool and began signaling that he wanted to fight again, specifically targeting the proposed UFC card at the White House. His interviews flipped overnight from "I'm done" to "I love to make history on that stage." Jon Jones never lost a light heavyweight belt in the cage. He never lost a heavyweight belt in the cage. He vacated one, retired from the other, through all of the chaos. Some earned, some unlucky, some entirely self-inflicted. He remains one of the most gifted fighters to ever lace up gloves. In my criteria, he's absolutely a double champ. 2 divisions, 2 heirs, one of the most complicated, controversial, undeniably brilliant champion in UFC history. Now let's go into an honorable mention, Alex Pereira. Before we go to our most recent double champion, we got to acknowledge Alex Pereira. Pereira made one of the fastest climbs in UFC history, winning the middleweight title by knocking out Israel Adesanya at UFC 281, then moving up and capturing the light heavyweight belt at UFC 295 by stopping Yuri. His run was explosive, violent, and completely unique. But because Pereira lost his middleweight belt before moving up, he never held titles in 2 divisions during the same era. So while he's a 2-division champion in terms of resume, he's not counted as a true W champion in my book. Still, with knockout power, that carries through every weight class. And with Pereira openly talking about heavyweight, he might be the closest thing we ever see to a future 3-division threat. And that alone earns him a place in history. Islam Makhachev, the 2 heirs 2-division king. Islam is the newest name on this list, and his road to double champ status looks very different from everyone else's. He won the vacant lightweight belt at UFC 280 in 2022, submitting Charles Oliveira with an arm triangle choke. That alone would have been a career-dividing win. But Islam didn't just hold the belt, he built a dominant reign. From there, he defended the 155-pound title 4 times. First in a 5-round fight with Alexander Volk at UFC 284, then torching Volk with a head kick knockout in UFC 294, choking out Dustin Poirier in a wild fight at UFC 302, and finally submitting Renato at UFC 311 to set the world record for most consecutive lightweight title defenses. That lightweight reign lasted 980 days, from UFC 280 in 2022 till June of 2025, when he vacated the belt. Not because he lost, not because he was stripped, but because he decided he was done at 155 and wanted a new mountain to climb. That new mountain was the welterweight division. At UFC 322 in 2025, Islam moved up to challenge JDM at 170 pounds at Madison Square Garden. JDM came in with vicious boxing and huge momentum, but Islam shut him down over 25 minutes, using calf kicks, chain wrestling, and suffocating top control to win a dominant unanimous decision and claim the welterweight title. Right now, that welterweight reign is just beginning. No defenses yet, but because he vacated 155 without ever being beaten, a lot of pure Islam fans see him as a pure 2-division champion. A man who conquered one weight class completely, walked away undefeated as champ, and then went up another and took that belt off the champ. Who do you think will dethrone Islam? Let me know below. So where do we stand now? The dream of being a 2-division champion isn't some fantasy anymore. It's a very real career goal that fighters talk about openly. You hear it all the time. Alex Pereira already did it. He openly talked about wanting to go to heavyweight and chase a 3rd title. You got champs like Tom Aspinall who are already being asked about welcoming Pereira to the heavyweight division. Contenders in every division talk about legacy fights and multi-division runs before they even had a shot at a single title. The sport has evolved. Fighters are bigger, more professional weight cuts, and far more strategic about their careers. But as the roster gets deeper, the UFC has to protect divisions too. Double champs slowed down everything. You get backups, interim belts, and long stretches where contenders just sit and wait. Just think of Jon Jones in a heavyweight division. So when someone does pull it off now and then, it feels very rare. You're not just beating one set of contenders, you're beating 2 different ecosystem of killers with totally different skill sets. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Now that we've seen multiple 2-division champions, will we ever see the impossible? The UFC's first triple champion. And if it happens, is Alex Pereira the guy to do it? If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe and drop a like, and tell me in the comments who you think has the best shot at becoming UFC's first 3-division champion.